Hey everybody, so happy Lent season, and in your little text there it says, so how are you doing? I hear some people saying that they're fasting. I really love some of the responses I'm getting here this year. People are saying, I am just going to do better for the next 40 days. And sometimes setting those reasonable expectations are better for us than putting us under a lot of stress, saying that we're going to do a water fast for 40 days, or we're going to do a cheese fast for 40 days. And so that way you just kind of consciously, I think your efforts are greater when you just say, you know what, I'm going to do better. And so it's the struggle internally to basically maintain the integrity of yourself by saying that, so you're kind of going against you versus putting that long drawn out thing there. So that way every hour you're doing better, you're doing good, you get through the days, you get through the weeks. Why are we talking about this? Because it's the Lent season, and this, as we're moving through Mark, and isn't it wonderful that we end up here at this particular time? This is one of my favorite passages. So for those of you who have been following me, know that we are using the Gospel of Mark because it's a very short gospel, because it focuses on the action. I always say that Matthew's my favorite gospel because it really focuses on the teachings of Jesus Christ, which are incredible. But Mark is like, hit the road. How do we become more like Jesus and less like us? And you learn how to do that. You learn discipleship in the Gospel of Mark. So we're going to continue where we left off, and we're going to continue on that path. But I'm also today, just because of the special occasion that we're in the middle of Lent season, and a lot of people are trying to do better, and it becomes a struggle. Fasting becomes a struggle. But you'll find how significant fasting was when Jesus was dealing with his largest struggles. And so I'm going to read Mark 1, where we left off last week. We were talking about the fact that John was about to baptize Jesus. So this week, Satan tempts Jesus. And it's only, interesting enough, Mark only dedicates 2 scriptures to the entire ordeal of Jesus being in the desert being tempted. And here they are. Verses 12 and 13. Immediately the Spirit drove him into the wilderness, and he was there in the wilderness 40 days, tempted by Satan, and was with the wild beasts, and the angels ministered to him. That's it. That's all that you get from Mark. So we're just going to put that page on the side for a second, and I want to read to you what the Gospel of Matthew has to say, because I think that even though we want to do like the Gospel of Mark and move, but it's important that we get a little prelude and some background information. And because Matthew does an excellent job of describing what Jesus wants us to know, I'm going to read from Matthew, the 4th chapter. And Matthew takes 11 verses versus the 2 verses that the Gospel of Mark took. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, afterward he was hungry. Now, when the tempter came to him, he said, "If you are the Son of God, command that these stones become bread." But he answered and said, "It is written, man shall not eat by bread alone. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him up into the holy city, set him on the pinnacle of the temple, and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he shall give his angels charge over you, and in their hands they shall bear you up, lest you dash your foot against a stone." Jesus said to him, "It is written again, you shall not tempt the Lord your God." Again, the devil took him up on the exceedingly high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, "All these things I will give you, if you fall down and worship me." And then Jesus said to him, "Away with you, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only you shall serve." Then the devil left him, and behold, angels came and ministered to him. Love, love, love this story if you understand the implications of it. So what I'm going to try to do here in a really quick period of time is bring the two together, emphasizing the most important things. And I think when we bring two of anything together, one of the things I tell people about raw food preparation and trying to come up with your own recipes is that you want to make hummus, you grab 10 recipes for hummus. And then you take that commonality and you know that you can't have good hummus without that thing that every single recipe is calling for. So you start with some chickpeas and some tahini. And then it varies from various creator to whether or not you want curry powder or you want a little milder spice, etc., etc. But you know you need the chickpeas, the tahini, and some olive oil, no doubt. And so what do we have that? Let's first start with a comparison in the two Gospels. What do we immediately recognize that both of them do, even in John's two little sentences, two scriptures, versus Matthew's 11 scriptures? First, it talks about the fact that immediately, so when you see the word immediately, you have to go before immediately to find out what happened when immediately got there. So it says immediately. So remember, not taking a look at Matthew, but taking a look at Mark. Last week or 2 weeks ago, we were talking about the fact that Jesus had been not only baptized, but the Spirit of God had descended upon him like a dove and saying, what? This is my Son who I am well pleased with. So what is that? That is Jesus, after being the faithful son to Mary and taking care of the family, as Joseph kind of disappeared off the scene, we assume that he was deceased. Jesus stayed at home and did his home duties for 30 years before he gets to a point where he hears the call of John. He recognizes this is the time, and then he goes on to take care of not his task for home, but his task for the world. And he knows this, and he is hearing in that, this is my Son who I'm well pleased. That's confirmation, one, that you are the chosen one, two, that you have a job to do. And so now that same dove, the Spirit of God that descended upon him, is the same Spirit that drives him into the desert. Isn't that something? And so here in the Gospel of Matthew, it says the same thing. He was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted. This is important, and I can testify to this, and some of you haven't seen me on Facebook a whole lot here lately, is because you all know that I got that multi-million-dollar contract award finally approved. And I have learned as a student of the Bible is that whenever you are at your peak, you are going to have to experience the valley. Why? Because people that are at a super peak are always striving for what? When you get to the mountaintop, you are looking to see another mountaintop. And if you can see it, it's usually higher than the one that you're standing on. But you can't fly over to that mountaintop. In order to get to that mountaintop, you've got to go through the process of going back down the mountain, in which you'll experience the valley in order to get to the higher peak. And this is the thing that we have to be aware of, is that whenever you are placed at your highest point, whenever you're at your so-called victory, whenever you've met an intermediate destiny in your life, when you get to that high point, be very clear that you will be tempted at that particular time. There's going to be a downfall. When you think of the stories in the Bible, we think of Elijah. Elijah, by himself, took care of all the prophets of Baal. Had Jezebel so angry that she threatened that she was going to kill him. And after all the defeating that he did alone, he's running from his life from a woman. Afraid, just panicking, scared to death, runs into the middle of nowhere. How does that happen? It happens because when God places you at that point where everything is going right, sometimes we kind of get into that celebratory mode and we kind of lose our footing because we're high in our elevation period. And that's all it's saying. It's not saying that something bad has to happen when something good happens. It just says beware, because the devil is waiting. He's like a lion sitting there waiting to attack. One time I did a sermon on the roaring lion and just the fact that 22 hours of the 24-hour day, he's basically resting, and those only 2 hours that he's not resting are the hours that he's on attack. So you can rest it up for a whole day just to come after you. And so when your guard is down a little bit, when you start in that celebratory period, just kind of patting yourself on the back. We can sometimes forget how we got to that level. And the minute that we start patting ourselves, thinking it was just us, kind of not paying attention to the fact that had it not been for the grace, the mercy, and everything else of God, we would have never gotten there. And so this is what's happening. So at the time that Jesus is at his highest point so far in his 30 years of living is the time that he's about to be tempted. And so I say all of that to say, pay attention to the fact that when something great happens to you, that might be a really good time to go into a season of fasting and praying, just so that you're on point. That's it. Just that your guard is not down. And when you're fasting and praying, there's a spiritual shield around you that only great things come your way. It's been my experience that when it's kind of like there's a shield that any negative energy, any negative thoughts, any negative anything kind of like boomerangs off of you. You just never feel it. You're on a spiritual high in that time. Why? That's when your fasting is done correctly. And so how is this fasting done? This fasting is done in the desert. And this is the same desert that John the Baptist hung out in, the one that's filled and surrounded with the limestone, and you can hear the howling of the types of animals that are out there. When you walk on the ground, you can hear the hollowness of it. It's like complete, they called it the devastation, this area here in which between the Dead Sea, Jerusalem, where John the Baptist lived and where Jesus was moved into a season of tempting. So there's a couple of other things that we just kind of want to bring because we've heard this story a million times. And I don't know how in depth some of the people that you've heard the story have gone through it, but I just want to pull some things to your attention. So that's one thing. It's that coming off of that spiritual high, that victory place, there's usually going to be the valley. Once you reach your highest peak, understand that there's a low peak. And be, if nothing else, understand that in order to get to that next highest peak, you got to be in that place. And that is where we meet Jesus the most. And Jesus put himself in a place where he could hear the voice of God the most. Why did this period have to take place? What was he looking to hear the voice of God? Because he said, this is my son who I am well pleased. Jesus had determined now is the time to take this task for the world and go forward with it. He knew what he had to do. The question becomes, how do you do it? When a man has a dream, I told you that a couple of weeks ago, a dream or a vision. Now the question is, how does the dream and the vision become reality? What is the process that has to take place? And of course, Jesus ultimately knew what the process is, but then you have the tempter. And that's why we need to spend a minute just telling you where that word came from. Here in Matthew, it says, the Spirit led him into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. Mark simply says, immediately the Spirit drove him into the wilderness, and he was there in the wilderness for 40 days, tempted by Satan. So what's the difference between Satan, the devil? So let's just do a little background here. So originally, you have to look at the Greek word for temptation, or the tempter, was basically an adversary to men. And then as it went along, it became someone that deliberately or maliciously spoke against man. And then you have the Jews that started saying, okay, there are two powers in the world, the power of the light and the power of the darkness. And then you basically divide that up to, you have God, and then you have the adversary or the opponent to, or anything that's opposite of God. So basically you get to a point now where you're going from the tempter, that thing that was just in its widest sense described as the adversary to man, to next the adversary to maliciously harm man, to now the opposite of God, the opposite of the power of God, the opposite of the light. So you have the darkness, you have the power against God. And so that becomes the devil in and of himself, who is basically the adversary to God, God's adversary versus man's adversary, And so that is where that word comes from. And so how does it come into context here? Then you have to look at what is he doing? He's tempting him. So the tempting that you and I recognize as temptation, the original Hebrew word for that, perizon, did not mean to be tempted like we view tempting and temptations today. It meant to test. And we think back to Abraham and where God says, I will tempt you. You know, this was like the ultimate test. He wasn't going to, and that was with us to give his son as a sacrifice. And what we have to understand, especially today when we talk about temptations, God is never going to put us in a position to be a sinner. So we have to recognize, what is the temptation for? What is the testing period for? It is not there to make you a bad person. It is there to make you a good person. It's not there to test you on how weak you are. It is there to actually strengthen you, to make you stronger in your mind, your spirit, your thoughts, you know, so that we can become better warriors. We can become better athletes for God. We can become better soldiers on the field for God. So each time that we're tested, it's kind of like, my background is engineering. And when I was in structural engineering, you take the steel and it has to be tested, and it goes through a strain test, it goes through a stress test, and you just keep refining it until it becomes the purest and the best steel, you know, your higher qualities of steel. And that is what happens to us. You probably wonder, God, I'm in another season of testing, you know, this is happening, that's happening. But here you stand. Here you're able to look back on all the things that you didn't think you were going to get through. And hopefully it has made you a stronger person. It has made you look at things and obstacles that come your way and say, hey, been there, done that, I can handle this, I'm ready for the next level, in fact. And that is what the testing was for. The testing was for to see whether or not necessarily if Jesus was going to do the task that was upon him, but how was he going to do the task? Was he going to do the task of bringing men to God by the way of God or by the way of the adversary of God? Now that may sound a little strange, but in essence it's not. It's simply the method. And in the book of Matthew, the focus basically in Jesus' teachings are the 3 lines of attack that the devil came after Jesus with. He tested him with saying, you know, give men something and make them follow you. Turn these stones into bread. You know, go to the highest pinnacle and test God. See whether or not he's going to send his angels to catch you. You know, how many times do we do that when we're trying to do something or trying to persuade people? We try and persuade people to follow us by giving them things. You know, we try to persuade people to follow us by doing something sensational. That never works. Because if you do something sensational, then you're going to always have to be doing something more sensational. That has absolutely no future to it. It's just a whole bunch of yoky-doke that continues to become more yoky-doke. And so Jesus is saying, I'm not going that way. I'm not going to get you to follow me by giving you bread. I'm not going to get you to follow me by using my powers to do something sensational. And then the last thing there is, I am not going to bow down to you. We are Christians, and this is what we're seeing a lot today, is that sometimes Christianity is almost as if we want people to, the Christians to stoop down to the world. No, we have a higher standard and make the world stoop up to us. We keep trying to bring so many things that the world is happy and what's popular in the world into the church, only for people to get bored with it and want to go to the next thing, and then they leave the church. And we find ourselves in that little switchy circle versus giving the pure, simple gospel that saves men, that is there for men all the time. And that is what Jesus, all he had to do was going, and that's what Mark, that's why there's only 2 scriptures here, because Mark is about the action. Mark is teaching us how to be disciples. What do you have to do to be a disciple? The choice is easy. It's 1, 2, 3. You go here, and this is what you do. So just 2 more things in the book of Matthew that we want to pay attention to, and we're going to wrap up in Mark as well. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, afterward he was hungry. Now, when the tempter came. So now the tempter is coming when? When he is hungry, 2, after he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights. Well, first of all, we have to understand that when the Hebrews use the term 40 days and 40 nights, it's not a literal sense. And I know the Matthew or Moses being on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, even Elijah again being able to deal with the meal from the angel for 40 days and 40 nights. When the Hebrews said that, it wasn't meant to be 40 days and 40 nights in the literal sense, but it's meant to be a considerable time. And what that considerable time was just that, a considerable time. So sometimes people get hung up on, I want to fast for 40 days, but a considerable time. That considerable time is a consideration for you. For you, you'd have never stopped chewing and eating all the 50, 60, 70, 30, 40 years that you've been living. A considerable time to fast could very well be, let's try not to eat anything for a few hours today. And so that considerable time is not that small, but it was considered a considerable amount of time that Moses was on the mountain. It's like we say a few days or so, a couple of days or so. When you say 40 days and 40 nights, it's a considerable amount of time. So first, let's get that out of the way. And then let's understand that he understood that a season, whatever that considerable time was, of fasting and praying, well, fasting and praying are kind of synonymous when you think about Jesus and the Word of God. But during that period, because when you're alone and when you're hearing things and when you want to hear the Word of God and hear the voice of God, then you should be praying. You're communicating with God. You know, it's not that thing that we think about when you get on your knees and it's that conversation with God. I'm praying without ceasing. And so that's what he was doing. And so it was then when the devil comes. And so the devil comes after the fasting. Jesus had to be able to deal with the devil. And you and I are going to have to deal with the adversary of God. As we're walking for God, you're going to have your enemy in this life and time. And so in order to deal with him in the best possible way, Jesus decided that it would be in fasting and prayer. How do we know this? Because this story is the autobiography written by who? Jesus Christ, because it says who? It says he went into the desert. The Spirit led him into the desert. And no one was in the desert but him. So he was alone in the desert. So how do we get this story? We get this story from Jesus Christ himself. And why? Why is this so important to have this autobiography of Jesus' struggle right here prior to him really walking into his ministry? To let you and I know that though it says that the devil, we have this long dissertation here in Matthew, and we have a mention of it in Mark about this great temptation that many people are aware of, but to let you know that, first of all, this is not a single struggle. This is not something that happened one time. In fact, we know when Jesus was in Caesarea, he told Peter, "Get thee behind me, Satan." You know, there's another time that he's dealing with Satan. We know in the Garden of Gethsemane, he told them that you, my disciples, have labored with me in my temptations. That's another time when the tempter was trying to get him to go against the will of God. So it's not something that happens once. It's not that victory that you get over one time. It is a daily, in most of our lives, it's going to be a daily thing. And to understand that though he went from, it says that the tempter took him from the pinnacle and then he took him over here to the holy. Jesus didn't go anywhere. He was in the desert. So what is this? This is in his mind. That is where the temptation is going to come. It is going to be the fight against yourself in your mind. It is going to be the devil that is going to attack your internal desires and thoughts. And that's important because most people think it's got to be the red devil that out here that I see, or somebody's going to hang a carrot in front of me. No, it's going to be that thing that you think you've conquered because you may not physically be doing it, but you're still thinking about it mentally. That is where the devil will come and he will try to make you fall. Right there in your mind. And how else is he going to do it in your mind? He is going to do it based off of where your strengths are. What did he test Jesus with? He tested Jesus against Jesus' own powers. Jesus was fully man in the flesh, but at the same time, he was fully God. So he had the power to turn the stones into bread. The tempter knows this because Jesus knows that, because he knows it in his mind that I can turn this. And that is what the devil is going to go after. He is going to go after us where our gifts are. Every single person has a gift that was given specifically to them from God. Some of us are great orators. Some of us have the gift of words. Those are people that are always trying to connive them ways out of something, excuse theirs, it's the gift of blib, whatever they call it. And then you have those that have the gift of charm, where you could just charm your way out of things. It is that area that you're going to be tested and tempted in. And at the end of the day, it's going to be whether or not you use those gifts as Jesus demonstrated here for the kingdom or on a selfish basis. There are people there, you think immediately of the musicians in the church that get paid a whole lot of money. And so we're not saying that we don't use the gift for our well-being, but when it comes to the kingdom, maybe we can give that gift freely and we'll be rewarded for it and pay some other place. But it's not to be used to just elevate us. It's not to be used just to satisfy our own personal agenda. It is always to be used to get men to come to God. And so yes, it's not a one-time thing. It's going to be something where you're going to be tempted against your gifts. It is going to be a situation where the fight is not external, but it's an internal fight in the head. And so all of this was going on, and John doesn't even talk about it in the Gospel of John. You have Matthew, Mark, and Luke that talk about it, but Matthew goes through this whole thing in terms of explaining what the different temptations were, the three different places. Remember, the mind, the body, and the spirit. So he was approached in three different defenses. The bread for the body, the mind that says that God is going to save you. How am I going to test you, God? Do I really believe in you? Do I really trust you? And then the soul, the spirit, And so those are the areas that we always, that's why I think holistic. We have to talk about the mind, the body, and the spirit at all times, because that is how we're going to be successful. And this is how Jesus did that. But Mark goes right here and he says, immediately the Spirit drove him into the wilderness, the same Spirit that just descended upon him and said, well done, my good and faithful, not well done, but this is my Son in whom I am well pleased. And he was there in the wilderness for 40 days, again, a considerable time, tempted by Satan, and was with the wild beasts and the angels that ministered to him. And that's it. That's all that he says. Because there's nothing else to say. Yes, you can go into all of this long explanation and how the devil tempted him or whatever. But remember, our goal here in this whole session and these whole events is to get us to be more like Jesus and less like ourselves, to get into how it is that we become true disciples. And Mark tells us clearly, this is what you do. You go fast for 40 days, and then you deal with the devil. And you do not have to do that alone. What's very interesting is that the things that Mark calls out the most is that and. So you have this piece over here, you have a fasting period, and you have temptation that you deal with. And with the wild beasts. So the wild beasts, there are four, the jackal, the hyena. There's like four of them that were in the desert. And so here's what's interesting. I was having a conversation with someone last week about the dog that was like, my dog never comes to anyone. Animals and children can pick up on good spirits. And I just think that Mark put this here because he's just about to get into how everybody was coming after him. The Pharisees and the Sadducees. Nobody really recognized the Son of God. Isn't it interesting that he did not get eaten in the desert? Because the beasts were able to probably recognize him as the Son of God, to recognize him as the good spirit way before even his disciples fully understood who he was. And I believe that that's the only reason that Mark puts that there, because the Bible does tell us that where God is eventually taking us to be is that where there is no separation, where beast and man will befriend each other. And so here you have not only the task that Jesus is trying to determine how to get to that end point, but there's a glimpse for him to see that end point. He's getting to see that eventually where God is taking us is where we're all one. The birds that fly, the fish that crawl in the sea, the creepy animals against the thing, and man. And then it says here, which is the most important part, is that, and the angels ministered to him. So we have, and with the wild beasts. And that also, if you really kind of want to stretch it a little bit, it says, and with the wild beasts. The wild beasts, that connotation says that that would be an enemy of yours if you're in the middle of a desert. You would be their food. You would be their prey. And it is saying that, and he was there. And there's some commentaries that talk about them being his companions, the wild beast being his only companion during his period in the beast. So it tells us that in life, they're going to be those enemies that try and attack us, to try to make us their prey, but they're no threat to us. They're no threat to the children of God. Why? Because the angels minister to them. This is nothing more than God telling us that you will never be alone. Even when you are alone, you are never alone. And even when you think you're alone, that help that you have will suffice for whatever condition that you're in. This is a beautiful passage. If you take the time and just go through it, pray and meditate upon it, I think that it will give you great wisdom into how to deal with struggles. We're struggling right now. We're going into some stuff. You know, we're in the middle of what might be or could possibly be World War III. We're in the middle of one pandemic leaving and a threat of other variants coming. We're in the middle of what's the church going to look like post-pandemic? Is there going to be a church of physical gathering as freely as we knew it to be? And if that doesn't take place, how are the saints going to be obedient to the word of God that says, do not forsake the assembling of one another? Are we going to commune together? We're going to get that fellowship back. So we're in a time that requires, I believe, a period of fasting and praying to clear our minds so that we raise above all the noise that's around us, all the doubt, the anxiety that's around us, and be the strong conquerors that we're supposed to be. What ultimately happened, Jesus had to go and decide, am I going to make my vision and my task a reality by going the way of God or the way of the adversary of God? So going the way of God, because you can still get to that point where you bring men to God. But how are you going to do it? Are you going to come being the fierce conqueror? Are you going to come slapping men into place, slapping people into a level of understanding and following and discipleship? Or are you going to come as he came, the loving king, you know? And that was the road that was going to lead him to the cross. And even though that looked dim, grim, whatever, ultimately the road by going the way of the cross was the road that led to the way of victory. And so that's fitting going into the season of Lent. So what I want to talk to you about is I want to, as we move from taking care of our spiritual health to our physical health, I thought it would be a great time. As I mentioned, today is International Popcorn Lovers Day. So DallasPopcorn.com, you know, you can go fast off of just having a healthy snack every day instead of the unhealthy snacks that you're having. This is his whole thing. Jesus had to decide what was the best way for him. You have to decide what is the best way for you. And I would say having some True Pop popcorn instead of whatever you're doing that you do on a regular basis might be a good way for you just to do better. And I love when the person, I don't remember who it was, that said, I'm just wanting to live considerably better for the next 40 days instead of fasting and all that stuff. But I want to give you a cleanse. I had to see some clients earlier today. And most people are dealing with the same struggles. Cardiovascular, cerebrovascular systems, blood is not moving, there's the blood viscosity, there's blood fat, there's cholesterol. Whenever you have components in your blood that are going to weigh the blood down, it keeps the blood from moving freely. So if you imagine the water system in your home, if there are paper towels and you know, other things that don't belong, feminine products that don't belong in the toilet, eventually they're going to clog and the water is not going to flow freely. So think about that when you think about your body and the fact that the blood needs to be clean in order to move freely. And so when we think about fasting, when we think about changing our system, when we think about going from being unwell to well, the first thing that we have to think about is our cardiovascular, cerebrovascular system, because that's the circulatory system. I always tell people you can only be as healthy as the gut But in actuality, in order for the gastrointestinal system to work properly, the circulatory system that is responsible for moving stuff in and out through that area has to be working properly. So we start this. When we think circulatory, we think about blood. And so when we think about blood, we think green foods clean the blood, red foods move the blood. We've said that many times. We talk about yellow foods or natural laxatives as a way to heal the body, get things out of the body, yellow foods. But today I want to just do something that I think is not an easier, but just a more adaptable way for people to get to a point of health. I believe that we get to that next mountain peak when we get to this level, and the way to get to the next one is just to do something that you can see. When you get to the top and you see how beautiful it is where you're standing, but you can only imagine how much more beautiful it is by the next peak, then I think that we become a little bit more disciplined, because people are on like a seesaw. They'll do healthy for a minute, or sometimes they even do healthy at the, they'll have a bag of popcorn with, a bottle of vodka and some buffalo chicken wings, hey. And they'll say, well, at least I'm doing some popcorn. So you want to get to a point where this becomes desirable, so to speak. And that's going to happen when you feel good. When we were doing the boot camp, I would always kind of put people in that position where they were going to see some results immediately. And I can motivate you. I can always get people where they're going, I'm coming tomorrow, But are they coming next week, in 2 weeks, in 30 days? It's going to be dependent upon the results that they get from the short period that they're there. So sometimes you got to kick people, get them jump started, and then that will eventually motivate them to continue the process of aspiring to do things better. And so this is a cleanse that comes from the Seneca Indians. And it is probably, I have done all kinds of fast cleansing, elimination programs for myself, for other people over the last 25 years. This by far, from the very first time that I experienced it into, it's been 15, 16 years now where I try to do it 3 or 4 times a year, is one of the most, I think, effective cleanses that is out there. And it's very strategic in terms of how it's done. I have it written up. If anybody wants me to email it to them, just inbox me. But it's very simple. And you just want to be considerate of what we are ultimately trying to do. We, on this program, are ultimately trying to be more like Jesus and less like us. And so it goes without saying that, yes, this is going to be a way to get rid of some water waste. It's going to be a way to clear your mind, do some good things. But think that we can do even more if we add periods of good rest, at least 6 to 8 hours of sleep daily, but try to throw a nap or 2 in there. Also to implement some praying and meditating time. Some people are like, oh, when you say meditation, they think that that's something that you have to go and learn how to do. Meditating simply says, I'm going to get up and do some prayer, some devotions or whatever. So in that period that you're spending doing that, try to spend an hour with God every day, just focusing on His Word and praying with it, talking to Him. And that makes, people that tell me that they don't have time to pray and meditate, I say, then you have a lot of time to be sick and in trouble. Because praying and meditating will keep you well and out of trouble. The more that you do it, the consistency that you do it on, that is what that leads to. For folks that don't have time to do that, that is why they're in some of the situations that they're in. And that's the honest to God truth. So this is only 4 days, and that's the great thing about it. It's an elimination program, but you get to chew throughout some of it. So, when you tell people fast for 3 to 5 days, even if it's off watermelon juice, that is an arduous task for most people. They're just like, and that's the first thing people say, I can't eat nothing. When I tell people I do a 30, the funniest thing, not to sidetrack a whole lot here, the funniest thing is every year when I tell people I do a 30-day water fast in January. So I was like, I'm going to start my 30-day water fast. And then people, and these are intelligent people. These are people that have some initials behind their names. These are people that are just, and they'd be like, only water? And where does that come from when somebody says I'm doing a water fast? That is what that is. A water fast. That's what's on the fast. If you're like, only water? And then you'll tell them, yes, only water. For the whole 30, I mean, it just goes on and then it continues to go on and on. But on this, whether it's a 2-day water fast or a 40-day water fast or a juice fast, that's just difficult when people feel like, okay, for that whole period, they're not thinking, I wonder if I can do this for an hour or half a day. They're thinking 4 days without chewing. Oh, that's going to kill me. And people will tell you that. I can't. They'll tell you without even attempting it. I can't do that. They'll just call it just like it. The same people that say, I can do everything. Christ, their strength is big. But don't ask me to do that because I can't do that. It's funny. But the 4-day Indian cleanse is a way to completely detox the entire system in terms of the blood, the lymph, and the inner organs. You get everything mineralized. So on the first day, it's fruits only. You can eat as many pieces of fruit as you want except bananas. No bananas. On your fruit day, you can consume, and I want you to consume, as many berries as you can, especially apples and pears, citrus fruits. But what I would like for you to try and do is keep them in the same family when you're doing it. So if I were to sit down and I'm going to have fruit at 8 o'clock, I'm probably going to have either all apples or all pears or possibly a combination of the two. The apples and pears, just in case you don't know, are in the same family. If I decide I'm going to have citrus, where I have oranges and I probably wouldn't eat a lemon, but oranges and grapefruits, I'm either going to eat an orange, a couple of oranges together at one time, or a couple of grapefruits, or them together. I'm not going to do the apples and the oranges together. So you want to kind of stay in the same family if possible, so I can sit and have raspberries and blueberries, any of the berries in that family. It'd be great if you just eat a bowl of blueberries and then an hour later have a bowl of blackberries and then another hour later have a bowl of raspberries. But if not, you can do those in a combination together. Sit down and have 2 or 3 apples. And that way, what you're doing is you're allowing the body some assistance in the cleansing program, because that's a lot for the body whenever we're mixing stuff together. We've talked about that before. The body has to break down each of them enzymatically, and it becomes a lot of work the more that it is. So that's just the way that we eat in our lives. But as you're on a cleansing program, you want to kind of at least stay in that arena so that you can get the best possible results as a result of that. And so what's going to happen on that day is you're going to clean out your colon. I mean, this is going to be serious. So you can eat as much fruit as you want to eat on that day, but I would also recommend that you blend. You do some juicing, and I want you to do it with the blender, because the whole purpose of the day of fruits only is to clean out the colon. And so the best thing to clean out the colon is high fiber, dietary fiber, soluble, insoluble fiber. And so when we're juicing, you're going to lose a lot of that in the mastication process. So when you dump this apple into the blender, you're going to be consuming the entire content, so you're not throwing away any of the fiber, because in the juicing period, a lot of the juice is extracted from the fiber, and then you end up throwing the fiber piece away. And so all you're going to do, which is quite simple, because I know most people have a blender versus a juicer anyway. So you take 4 apples and you simply chop them into 4 pieces. Remove the seeds, throw them into the blender with some distilled water, whether it be 8 ounces, 16 ounces, depending on how much, you want to it. But also understand that when we are juicing like that, if your body is not accustomed to a lot of raw foods and things, you usually want to dilute your juice, because it can be pretty concentrated if you just do the apple. So dilute it with, probably a little bit more water than you want. And then what you can do is you can take a lemon and squeeze the juice from the lemon into the liquid that you just created from the apples and the water. If you want it to taste more like a ginger ale, you can put a small piece of ginger in there as well. So what I want you to do is try to consume at least 2 to 3, maybe 4 if you can, cups of definitely some apple pear juice. Either apple juice or apple and pear juice. You don't want to just do pear juice by itself. That is going to help you a lot. You can do an entire pineapple. You can juice the pineapple if you want. I typically like my pineapple with honey and ginger. We don't want to do honey on the fruit day. But if you just want to do pineapple, eating the pineapple probably would be better. But juicing the apples, because of the amount of naturally occurring pectin, P-E-C-T-I-N, which is the first ingredient on any good colon cleanser, that's exactly what it's going to do. So having consumed, eat some apples, drink some apple juice, and you're going to feel great. You're going to have energy out the gazoo during that day. You're not going to feel neglected or anything. You're going to feel like you're eating way too much. Just keep eating the fruit. And here's what's going to happen. Here's the one small downside of that, is that by the time that you go to bed that night, the body is going to be cleansing so much. And when you finally put that body at an angle of rest, you're probably going to be going to the restroom the majority of the night. You're going to be back and forth to the restroom. You just may well put your pillow in the bathroom because you're going to be urinating like crazy. And so the elimination channel for the colon is what? The main purpose is defecation, and then the kidneys is urination actually, but that's going to be helping. So here's what's interesting, is that we're not going to be defecating as much. You may get some out of there, but the majority of what's going to be happening during the night is going to be urination, but you're going to be urinating a lot of matter. What you're going to be doing is excreting a lot of toxic matter through your urine. And that's important to know and to understand that process that's happening, because you're going to go to bed probably carrying a little bit in here, and when you wake up in the morning, it's going to be like, whew, somebody came into a tummy tuck or whatever they call it, just sucked something out of you, and then that's going to really encourage you to say, ooh, okay, I can do this. You might want to, you'll probably be looking so great and feeling so good, the little ache and pain that you had in your knees, your back, or what is going to disappear in the toilet with everything that you're pissing out all night long. Trust me on this. And so most of you are going to want it, because I've got clients, been dealing with this for many years, and what they want to do is like, oh, I'm going to do another day of this. We can try that another time. That's not the purpose. The purpose of the 4-day cleanse is to cleanse the entire body. You want to get to a point where I recommend that you do 2 or 3 days, take a whole week of eating nothing but fruits. You know, I do that for periods at a time in the summer, because you just want to be a fruitarian in the summer, because you just have access to so much great fruit. So you're going to do that. Then the second day, what we're going to do is we're going to go and release all of the salt and the toxic matter that came from cleaning out the colon by eating or by drinking herbal teas only. So the Dr. Dallas green organic tea is like perfect, but you also want to do things like peppermint, hibiscus, dark cherry juice tea if you can find it, but definitely some hibiscus without a doubt. Peppermint is going to do a lot, because that's releasing a lot of the stress from the nerves as well as cleansing. And so you want to put the salts back into the system. That's going to do it on the second day. And so here's what you do technically. So say like on Tuesday and Thursdays, I see clients. And so I'm talking all day long, then I do a video production on Thursday. So it's easy for me to not get a chance to eat on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So that would be a perfect day for me to let my second day fall on that day, because you only get to do herbal teas. And that way you're not tempted to eat something, you're not looking at food, you're not dealing with whatever, and before you know it, the day is gone. And then on those days, I tell people, just, go to bed early, and then that way when you wake up tomorrow, you get to eat again. You were able to eat all the fruit you wanted the day before. Now you're going to do herbal teas, and then on day number 3, as many vegetables as you can consume. You start out with a nice little green salad with some lettuce greens in there, some cucumbers and tomatoes, and just a little bit of olive oil and lemon juice if you have to have something on it. But the juice from the lettuce and things is going to be more than enough. And after a day of drinking only tea, that lettuce is going to taste like hamburgers. Trust me. And that's the good thing about fasting, is that when you come off a fast, a little anything is like, wow, a feast. After not eating anything, and you're like, overeating is way overrated. And so you want to do, however, a combination of raw vegetables as well as steamed vegetables, especially when you look at the cruciferous family. So when you start looking at the broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, asparagus, just go ahead and steam that. That's a little bit difficult for people to consume when they're not doing raw on a regular basis. And so that's day number 3. So what's day number 4? So day number 3, you're putting the nutrients and the minerals back into the system with the vegetables. Now we just kind of want to mineralize the entire body. So on day number 3, when you're doing your vegetables, at the same time, put a large pot on the oven, throw in some cauliflower. I usually use cauliflower, carrots and carrot tops, beets and beet tops, and most important are the skin of Idaho potatoes. So the nutrients in Idaho potato skin is like, you've probably heard people say, is like having an oxygen IV. It's just something in there that whenever I do a vital broth, a healing broth, a mineral-rich broth, I take this about that much, a 1/4 inch or so of the skin of white potatoes, Idaho potatoes, and put them in the pot. And you want to boil. That's why you want to get organic, because you want to do that, because a lot too with root things, when they pull the potatoes up, and if they go and replant before they've had an opportunity to turn that ground and let it air out, then you're going to have those mites that end up growing in the potatoes the second time around. So you kind of want to be careful where you buy your potatoes. But I know a lot of people are budget conscious or whatever, but some things, when you understand the information that goes behind it, it's just well worth it to get one where the process is organic. So put some of those potatoes in there and just boil it, and then on day number 4, you're just drinking the broth. Now, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll strain everything, and then I'll put the strained contents into a Tupperware bowl in the refrigerator, and then the day after, the 5th day, coming off of your 4-day cleansing where the stomach is a little weaker, what you want to do is take that, the stuff that you had boiled, and then you can put it over, I don't really do brown rice, but maybe some quinoa. I sprout quinoa without cooking it. It's a fussy little seed, but you can just put it in, cover it with water for a few hours, and it sprouts on its own. And so you can eat it just like that without even having to apply heat to it. But if you want to just, boil a little quinoa and then put those vegetables that you had strained in with the quinoa and a little oil and some seasoning on day number 5, that's a great way to transition back into eating cooked and solid foods. But that 4-day period, 1 day of fruits, all the fruits that you can eat, minus bananas, definitely get some fruit juice, apple fresh juice that you blended. 2nd day followed by herbs, herbal teas, definitely green teas, peppermint, hibiscus tea. The 3rd day, all the vegetables that you can consume, raw vegetables as well as steamed vegetables. Not cooking anything to a pulp, but just lightly steaming some of your heavier vegetables. And then on the 4th day, doing a vegetable broth all day. I am going to tell you, you're going to write in and just be like, wow, didn't my doctor know this? Because some of your little illnesses and diseases are going to go right out of the window. Right now, a lot of people are dealing with lupus-like symptoms. A lot of that has come from some of the people that have been vaccinated and had some pre-existing conditions. Didn't have to go necessarily through the virus, but they're having a lot of symptoms that really look like lupus, that really aren't highly defined by the doctor. They don't know what's going on, but these people are swollen, their joints are all over the place. And so things like this 4-day cleanse will be extremely helpful to you and will provide a lot of comfort, give you an opportunity to spend some time with God, and give you an opportunity to reflect on, a lot of the mistakes that we make in life is because we just refuse to go to God and just be quiet and be still before we move into a new venture, before we, just make a decision on something. And so this will give you a time of reflection, a period where we too can be tested in our mind and arise victoriously. I hope that's been helpful. Free to answer any questions, just simply DM me or send me an email. Take care.